Good evening, everyone. My name is Robin Friedman, and I am one of the co-founders of Tribe Talk. And along with myself and my co-founder, Jude Sidney, as well as the Jewish Endowment and Education Fund of the Bay Area, the Jewish Federation and Endowment Fund of the Bay Area, and Combined Jewish Philanthropies, Jewish Teen Initiative of Boston, I'd like to welcome you here tonight for this important conversation with Dr. Samantha Meinrath-Vinokor about anti-Semitism on the college campus. We're thrilled to have you here tonight. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Vinokor. First of all, she's the Senior Director of Knowledge, Ideas, and Learning at the Jewish Education Project. She's an expert on Jewish identity development, Gen Z, anti-Semitism, and Israel education. She's not a hard worker or anything. She's worked with Jewish communities around the United States and Israel. She's been recognized for her work with Jewish adolescents in Cleveland, Washington, D.C., and New York. She's the author of #Antisemitism, Coming of Age During the Resurgence of Hate. She's an alumna of the University of Pittsburgh and the Jewish Theological Seminary, as well as Gratz College. She lives in New York with her husband, her 5-week-old new baby, and her 2 beloved rescue dogs. Before I turn the webinar over to Samantha, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, please note we're recording the entire session today, and it will be posted on our website soon so you can share it. In addition, please put all questions in the chat, and we will try to get to all of them. Before we learn, and I know we're going to learn a tremendous amount tonight, first, Samantha, I'd like to ask you about your new book. I know it's out on as an ebook form right now, and thanks to supply chain issues, will be out in hardcover in June. But can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, and thank you so much, first of all, for just the opportunity to be here and for bringing together this group tonight for what I clearly think is a really important topic. My book is called #Antisemitism, and it focuses on Jewish Gen Zers who are really coming of age during an unprecedented, to use an overused term, time in American history, in world events, and specifically with regards to anti-Semitism. We're seeing how anti-Semitism is shaping Jewish experiences and shaping Jewish choices in a way that hasn't happened before, both pros and cons, so to speak. There are people, and I'm sure there are people on this webinar who could relate to the idea of it's really scary sometimes to be Jewish right now, to be visibly Jewish, to be actively Jewish. There's hatred out there. We see in social media, in real life, whatever that means, that there are people who don't like us. There are people who might want to hurt us, and therefore people want to retreat. That's a reaction to anti-Semitism. At the same time, there are also people who are saying, there's someone who wants to hurt me. Like, I'm now going to, put the biggest Jewish star on my face that I can and make sure that I am loud and proud and vocal and active. And that's also a super legitimate reaction and response to anti-Semitism. But either way, this global context and backdrop that these coming of age moments are happening within is shaping them. And I wanted to explore that. So the book focuses on everything from what does it mean to be the last generation to meet Holocaust survivors? How are parents of Gen Zers shaping these conversations and experiences? How does the Israel conversation factor in? What is the social media piece? How do we take a generation that's the most diverse Jewish generation that we've ever seen, racially, economically, so many different ways, and factor those pieces into how do we deal with it when, there's a way to look Jewish, and a lot of us don't look Jewish, but maybe we want people to know we're part of this group, or maybe it's nice to be able to pass for not. So many different questions that I'm sure, again, the people on this webinar, their peers are definitely facing. And it was really an honor to delve into those deeply in the book.
So for everybody, I know after listening to you tonight, everybody is going to want to go out and buy the book. So just so you know, everybody, we're going to post the links in the chat, but you can get it on Amazon in ebook format now. You can also get it, you can pre-order it through Samantha's website. Again, will be in the chat. I am going to get it on ebook form right away because I definitely want to read it. So Thank you very much. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you with the first question, which is, what is anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism?
Amazing. All right. So we're jumping right in. So anti-Semitism, oh, sorry. Can everyone see me? We're going. Okay. Anti-Semitism has a lot of different definitions. It's been called the world's oldest hatred. It's been called the most pervasive hatred. It's hatred of Jews. It's hatred of more than Jews. And I want to draw our attention. I apologize that the slides are going to be a little bit out of order, but if we could move to slide number 6, I have a definition of anti-Semitism to share. Perfect. So this is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's official definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. This is possibly the most comprehensive official definition of anti-Semitism that has ever existed. And I just want to highlight a few things within it. Many of us can say, I know what anti-Semitism is. I totally know that if someone paints a swastika on my locker, or since we're talking about the college experience right now, on the door of my dorm room and I'm Jewish, that's anti-Semitism. I got this. If someone, harasses me because of my Judaism or makes a comment about my nose or my curly frizzy hair, they're stereotyping me as Jewish. That's anti-Semitism. Check plus. But what we're seeing in this definition is that that's just a jumping off point. First of all, it's a perception of Jews. That perception could be positive or negative. I don't know if anyone here can relate to the experience of having had an experience of a moment of, you don't know if it's anti-Semitism. Maybe it's just awkward. When I was interviewing someone for the book, they said they didn't really know what to do when someone asked, like, what resort are you going to for spring break? And the person said, like, what are you talking about? I'm not going anywhere for spring break. And the response was, oh, I assume that all Jews like go on vacation. Subtext being because all Jews are rich. Now, it's a perception of Jews, not necessarily always seen as a negative. I enjoy going on vacation, but it's saying that because you're Jewish, I associate you with money. I have a perception of you as someone who has wealth for some reason related to your Judaism. So that qualifies under this definition of anti-Semitism. Again, it may be expressed as hatred. It may not, but the stereotyping of Jews in and of itself counts. Next up, we have directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals. So what does that mean? Anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews. So how could it be about someone who's not Jewish? Well, we have this phenomenon of people who aren't Jewish, but who are in Jewish spaces, which is absolutely amazing. We want our spaces to be inclusive and for people to be able to get to know Jews and explore Judaism, whether or not it's something that they're born into or that they're choosing to adopt as their own. Maybe they're just, again, allies, people who we're seeking out and we want to be in relationship with. Again, going back to the swastika on a dorm room door example, which of course I hope does not happen to anyone here. My roommate in college, who remains my best friend until today, was Catholic. If we had had the experience of a swastika or another hate symbol put on the door of our room, maybe it would have been directed towards me as the out and proud, loud and proud Jew in the room, but she would have been violated as well. She would have had a hate symbol on her door as well, simply by being in proximity. So that's a space where, again, non-Jewish individuals being targeted under this definition of anti-Semitism bears noting. And finally, it's not just towards people. We've seen buildings be under attack. We've seen spaces that are supposed to be safe Jewish spaces be violated under the precepts of anti-Semitism. And that's super real. And to not be able to feel safe in what are supposed to be our safe spaces is horrible and heartbreaking. And again, falls under this definition. So anti-Semitism it's overt and it's covert. It's a swastika being graffitied somewhere, something we all know. And then it's those questions of someone made a Jewish joke and I know they didn't necessarily mean it the way that it came off, but it made me uncomfortable. Does that count as anti-Semitism? I'm here to just say, first of all, that all of your feelings are valid. And if you think it counted, if it made you uncomfortable because of your Jewish identity, it counted as anti-Semitism. But there's a gray area, and we can definitely talk about that as well. Then we have anti-Zionism, the Israel piece of all of this, which makes things that much more complicated. It's been said, and I would completely agree, that anti-Zionism is like the socially acceptable anti-Semitism, because we would never say that you can't criticize Israel. Criticism of Israel, like criticism of the United States, like criticism of any other country in the world, is legitimate. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of thought, both in the United States and in Israel. We should have those things. No one is saying that you can't criticize Israel, but we have this conversation of how is Israel in so many spaces a proxy for Jews, that things you can't say about Jews, you can't say in hopefully polite society, Jews are bloodthirsty. That used to be something you could say if you ever want to Google anti-Semitic political cartoons. There's a lot of Jews drinking blood. But now you just sub in the word Israel for Jew. You can't say Jews are bloodthirsty and put a picture of someone who looks like me or looks like perhaps some of you and have that be a thing. But you can certainly put a picture of an IDF, Israeli Defense Force soldier, and have them committing, atrocities in a political cartoon and say, well, that's not because they're Jewish, that's because they're Israeli. That's okay. I'm allowed to criticize Israel. So what I want to bring up for everyone is, how do we recognize the difference? When is criticism of Israel legitimate, something that probably most of us do, and when does it cross the line? And I'm putting into the chat in one moment, because apparently it's just loading now. Here we go. I'm putting in, we have the 3Ds. So this was a concept that was developed by Natan Sharansky, who's an Israeli politician and was a dissident in the former Soviet Union. He was someone who was known as a refusenik, who was someone who was jailed for years for being a Zionist, for being a Jew, and for attempting to immigrate to Israel, which ultimately he did, and went into politics and has since held many leadership roles in the Jewish world. So he said, here's how we figure out the test of, did legitimate criticism of Israel morph into anti-Semitism? You have 3Ds. First one is delegitimization. So what's that? Essentially, is what you're saying about Israel questioning Israel's right to exist. If you're questioning Israel's right to exist, you have crossed the line into, this counts as anti-Semitism. So what's an example? If someone were to say, you know what, I think Israel needs to do a better job of providing equality for its Muslim citizens, that the per capita spending for infrastructure in a Jewish town and a Muslim town are different. Their roads aren't paved as frequently. They don't have as regular trash pickup. We need to work on this and have these different communities have more equal treatment by the different municipalities. Amazing. Let's have that conversation, like with all of us in this. When it crosses the line into delegitimization, is then saying Israel doesn't deserve to exist because Israel treats its minority differently than the majority of citizens. Israel shouldn't exist as a Jewish state. Israel's a colonialist endeavor. Jews don't actually even belong here. Why don't they go back to Europe? You are not native to the Middle East. Have you seen how white some of you are? You only came here because of the Holocaust, and therefore you should leave. Clearly, I think we could emphasize that whole monologue as that escalated quickly. It's questioning Israel's right to exist. It's questioning Israel's right to be a Jewish and a democratic state. Delegitimization, number one. Second one is what I alluded to earlier, demonization. Demonization is taking Israel, Israelis, and particularly often Israeli soldiers, and turning them into inhuman, portraying Israel as evil or demonic or satanic, and saying that Jews again, things that we've heard in different tropes of anti-Semitism throughout history are conspiring to control the world, ruin the world, are the reason why things have gone wrong, so to speak. The blood libel is an example of this, and now it has transformed into feelings about Israel. So in this case, again, it's not saying, you know what, I think that Israel, whatever it is, should be doing more to pull out of the Gaza Strip, should be doing more to cooperate with Palestinians, should be doing more to cooperate with its Arab neighbors, should be doing less to cooperate with its Arab neighbors. I don't know where everyone lays here politically, and it's, an open space in that regard. Demonization is saying Israel's inhuman. Israel's stealing Palestinian children just for the sport of it, the same way that they used to take babies of Christian children and use them to make matzah, which was the original blood libel to say around the time of Passover that Jews would steal non-Jewish babies because we needed their blood. Demonization, taking Israel and Israelis and making them inhuman. And the third one is double standards. So that one is almost the most comprehensive because it's basically saying, again, you can criticize Israel. We all can. We all should. We should hold Israel to the highest possible standards. But if you're going to hold Israel to the highest possible standards and not have the rest of the world follow suit, you're having a double standard and you're creating a metric for Israel that doesn't exist for anyone else. So that might mean saying that Israel, again, could do more for its Arab citizens, 1,000%. Let's discuss. But to say Israel is a human rights violator, but I'm totally going to ignore everything that's happening in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Yemen, from Russia to Ukraine right now, leaving the Middle East aside, from China towards its indigenous minority populations. I'm just going to ignore all of that because, oh my God, did you see what Israel did? So double standards. If you're someone who would say, no country has a right to exist. I am an anarchist and I don't believe in borders and I don't believe in passports and I believe that for the whole world. Okay, interesting. I would love to hear, where that's coming from and how that makes sense. But if you're going to say, well, other countries have the right to exist and the right to have a national religion, and we would never tell Italy to get rid of Catholicism or Saudi Arabia to get rid of Islam because we are inclusive and we love diversity and we want people to be able to express their religion the way that they see fit. But Israel can't be a Jewish state. Like, that's weird. Well, then you've hit double standards. So that's how we measure when does legitimate criticism of Israel morph into that question of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. So I just want to give that as like a foundational piece for hopefully everything else that we'll be able to discuss over the course of our time together. If anyone has any questions, please feel free at any point, put them in the chat. We are definitely monitoring. You're also welcome, if you don't necessarily want to share them to the whole chat, to just send them to the host and panelists, and we are happy to anonymize you in your content. So I want to take a step back and jump to slide number 3, if we can. I don't know if people are seeing the slides. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Cool. Thank you. So just a few ground rules. As I know, again, a webinar is a slightly impersonal format. We can't all see each other. I hope to have a chance to connect with all of you in other capacities as well. But as you're starting to utilize the chat function of what are we doing tonight? So first up, ask any question however you would like to ask it. There's very little that shocks me at this point. There's very little that I could imagine not being able to respond to, even if the response is to say, I need to direct that elsewhere. So if you want to ask a question publicly in the chat, absolutely. If you want to send it to the host and panelists, as Shauna just said, for privacy and anonymization, amazing as well. Feel confident in using either feature. You, I guarantee, will not be alone. Next up, your choices are valid and your concerns are real. We're going to be talking about the top 10 ways to prepare for Jewish and Israel life on college campus. And I really want to emphasize, like I said earlier, whichever direction you're going, is super legitimate. If you come away from this and say, I need to show my Judaism at every cost because someone is questioning this, I am going to show up on campus wearing an IDF t-shirt and a baseball cap with the name of my school written in Hebrew letters, and I'm going to become the president of Hillel and take every Jewish studies class I can. Amazing. Like, see you there. We are all proud of you. If that's not your takeaway, if you say, you know what, I'm going to be a pre-med major and I'm super excited about ultimate frisbee and rushing a fraternity, amazing. I wish that college experience for you. It was not mine because I'm not equipped for ultimate frisbee or sorority fraternity life, but that's great. But if you take with you, I'm confident that if and when I have an Israel or a Jewish related question or dilemma, I know where to turn, and I'm confident in my own Jewish journey and where that's taking me right now. That's awesome too. So wherever you're coming from, your choice is valid, and the questions and concerns you have are real. There are definitely people who are going to say, this is overblown, college is fine, let it go. Great, that's awesome. Go in confident. We are with you. If you're nervous, that's super real as well. Next up, we are not here to rank schools. The number of conversations that I, and I'm sure other members of the staff here, have had that have focused around, like, is that a good school for Jews? Is that a good school for Israel? Oh my goodness, is that not a good school for Israel? Are more than I can count. And that's not what we're here to do. We're not here to say, this is a good school, this is a bad school. First of all, some of you may be going to the schools that would come to mind on either end of that spectrum. We're here to say, how can I, regardless of the school that I ultimately end up setting foot on campus on, have a positive, empowered, proactive Jewish experience there? And finally, brave space. I feel like that's just a given. If someone puts a question into the public chat and you know them offline, they were brave by putting that question in, and we're going to honor that rather than calling them out before or after. To be like, I didn't know you felt that way. That was weird. Are you sure? Things that we all know, but sometimes just need to say out loud. So I just want to name those. And then I would love to jump to the first, to put the Menti into the chat and just get your voices out here a little bit as well. So if you give it 1 second, Shauna's going to put a link in the chat to a Mentimeter poll that we have set up. You can click on it. It should be open and everyone should be able to access the word cloud within, which has, which has the question of, as you are going to college or you're thinking about college, Jewishly and otherwise, what are the words that come to mind for you? We're going to create a word cloud. So take a moment and take your time. Okay, I'm seeing excited pop up really big and I love it. Yes, this is such an exciting time and I hope everyone gets to experience that. Okay, we've got nervous. Okay, so I'm seeing other words come in. Excited is powering through as our biggest one. Nervous, community, connection, ready, awesome, friendship. Yes, that's beautiful. We'll leave it open for another minute. Oh, anxious. Thank you. Psyched. I don't know if I had already seen empowered, but I just really like seeing that word there. So I want to call it out. I'm going to leave it open for another minute on this slide, just so people can keep, going to it and keep adding. Please feel free to do so. But I think this is amazing. We're seeing excitement as a prevailing theme, as it should be. This is such an exciting time of life, experience to be having, and beautiful. But it's really nerve-wracking, Jewishly, non-Jewishly. Like, dorms are intense. Picking a major living not at home. What is laundry, as someone's still trying to figure that out, because as it was said, I have a 5-week-old baby and I'm doing a lot of laundry right now. Nervous. Yeah. Psyched, ready. We're seeking connection and community. Maybe you're going to a place where you already feel a sense of connection. Maybe you're nervous about getting that. Maybe you're excited and empowered about the friendships that you're anticipating having, or the ones that you're coming in with. Maybe those are the sources of nerves. I have no idea, but I also like deeply know and get it. And we have all been there, and it's an amazing, amazing time, Jewishly and otherwise. I would love to, jump to slide number 4. Thank you. So as was mentioned earlier, I have my book coming out called #Antisemitism. And I want to just read a couple of quick excerpts from it, focusing on the college experience, particularly as it relates to Jewish and anti-Semitism on campus. The first one is an anecdote from a conversation I had with Brad, whose name has been changed, who is someone who works with high school and college students in the Midwest as a Jewish communal professional. Brad noted the psychological impact that the Jewish and specifically Israel-focused situation on many college campuses has on Gen Zers who are just figuring out their identities. To quote Brad, "Being on college campus and being called a baby killer for being a Zionist is going to impact your mental health. Many parents from all Jewish and political streams of ideology view the college years as a watershed moment when it comes to their children's Jewish identities." This was super real for me because we're all thinking about mental health right now. We know that during COVID, teens, emerging adults, those of us who care about teens and emerging adults, pretty much all of us have had a massive upheaval when it comes to our overall mental health as a society. I cannot speak to, how anyone on this call has particularly dealt with it, but I'm quite sure we can all just find something to nod about when it comes to the mental health struggles that have come about in the last few years of the pandemic and otherwise. And to have that augmented by being in a space where perhaps for the first time, you're feeling attacked by your basic identity because of who you are, because of this component of who you are that maybe you're still figuring out, your Judaism, your Jewish identity, that's super real. Especially if you didn't ask for it, if you're not standing on a street corner hosting a pro-Israel rally, although even if you are, it's not an excuse for some of the vitriol and the rhetoric that's out there. It was really intense for me to talk to Brad about this in a pre-COVID world and to just imagine how much it has escalated since then. Next up is from Dana, name also changed, who lives in the South and is a Hillel professional. "I see college students today who will only say they're Jewish inside their homes and in these little protective bubbles. But they don't want to put up signs advertising Hillel events or show their Judaism outside of those limited spaces. I want my kids to be comfortable being Jewish wherever they are." Now, again, this falls into almost direct contradiction with what I was saying earlier in terms of all choices are valid. And I want to re-acknowledge all choices are valid. It's totally up to you to decide where and how you feel comfortable expressing any part of your identity, whether it's your sexual orientation, your gender identity, and your religion, your culture, your faith, all of the above, totally up to each of us. But it's heartbreaking to hear how many people are saying, I love being Jewish, but that's my inside self. My outside self, I don't want people to know. Now, if you've made that decision for some other reason, we could have that conversation. But if that decision is coming from a place of fear, we saw the word empowered being used. We want everyone to feel empowered in their Judaism, to express it wherever, whenever, however they want. And thinking about that being a question, again, really challenging. And finally, this is a comment from Melinda, who lives in the DC area and is the mom of a Gen Zer. Who specifically was talking about Israel on campus. Growing up, so this is for her as a parent, it felt like there was more moral clarity. I knew that I was Jewish and therefore what my values were. But now things are a lot more ambiguous, and a lot of that is Israel. No matter what you say, It's toxic to a key part of your community. Generation Z as a whole will probably be afraid to explore what they believe and to do research or to take an unpopular stance within their social groups. We're moving towards more polarization with Israel and young Jews. Going to Israel isn't enough to fix that. It's something, and it shows complexity, but there has to be more. So again, we're talking about Israel in an increasingly polarized society where we're much more likely to retreat into our silos, into our bubbles. Our social media feeds are full of echo chambers because we want to hear the things that we want to hear. And it's considered self-care and self-preservation to not necessarily, hear from people who are attacking your beliefs on a number of different subjects. But then how do we deal with Israel inside and outside of the Jewish community if we're only willing to and able to listen to the parts that already agree and validate what we have said? Just things I want everyone to think about as we go into really the meat of this, the top 10 things to know before you get to campus. I'm going to skip slide 6 because that was the definition of anti-Semitism that we already talked about, and jump to slide 7 for a few framing stats before we jump in. So, few key statistics, and I think some of these were actually echoed for those who were here a couple minutes early in the presentation that was put together. So win-win, we're going to just re-emphasize. Number 1, 90% of American Jews believe anti-Semitism is either a very serious or somewhat of a problem. That's massive. When was the last time 9 out of 10 Jews agreed on anything else in a situation that you've been present in? Again, if you have an answer to that, please place it in the chat because I would love to hear. However, we also see 60% of the general public believes that anti-Semitism is either a very serious problem or somewhat of a problem. Now, on some level, that's a really good stat. It's more than half. More than half of the overall population sees anti-Semitism as a problem. Good, important, because it is. But also, where is this gap between 90% of Jews and 60% of the overall population? What do we do with that 30% of people who haven't caught on to where the Jewish community is in terms of seeing this problem? What happens when you get to campus and you want to talk about anti-Semitism? You want to make sure that you're being protected against it the same way that any other minority population should and needs to be protected against hatred directed towards them. If almost half, 40% of people out there don't actually think it's a problem, how do we have to justify, hatred of me is just as important as hatred of someone else? And finally, we're seeing that older Americans are more likely to say that anti-Semitism is a problem. So 70% of those 65 plus, as opposed to 52% of those ages 18 to 35. 18 to 35 includes the majority of students on college campuses. May not include all of the professionals who are there in terms of professors and staff and Hillel and all of the above. But it's just over half of people in the college age years who are agreeing that anti-Semitism is a problem. That's also a really big deal because if you're experiencing or facing or concerned about anti-Semitism, the last thing that you would want to do is first have to justify it and to explain to someone, no, this is a problem and I'm scared, to then have to go into, well, why are you scared? Is this really a problem? Don't you have privilege? Like, because, you're white, because you're Jewish. Well, first of all, not all Jews are white. So we should talk about that too. I see a question in the chat. Yes, Jews are included in the 60% of the general population, but because Jews are about less than 2% of the overall US population, this is demonstrating the gap between when you have the Jewish community being polled and the overall population. So 100%, yes, Jews are included in the 60%. I'm now saying percent way too many times. And Joan, thank you for asking this question of how do we measure correctly. So the 30% gap may not be entirely statistically significant between the overall and Jewish populations because the Jewish population is counted twice. Thankfully, I'm not a statistician, so I appreciate the acknowledgement and the call in and the call out there. Just yes and. So I want us to move forward to slide number 8 to start talking about our top 10 things to do. So first 3 are going to focus on setting up for success. Number 1, know what resources are available to you. The Jewish community is amazing and challenging and complicated and complex, and it's super organized. Wherever it is that you are going to school, maybe there's a Hillel. Not every campus has one, but definitely there is a Jewish population in the region. There's a Jewish federation that serves that community, because even the most rural, unincorporated of communities have a federation whose catchment area that they are part of. Usually that means there's also a JCRC, a Jewish Community Relations Council. There's an ADL office, an Anti-Defamation League office that covers your location, assuming that you are somewhere in the United States. Whether or not they're super local, we've seen in the COVID pandemic, there is no longer a difference between near and far, because thanks Zoom, as demonstrated by the diverse crowd here tonight. So there's resources available to you. There are people there to help you, whatever it is you need help with. If you're realizing, you know what, there's not enough Jewish life on my campus, and I want to figure out how to have a Shabbat community, have a Shabbat experience, there are resources out there to help you. If you are encountering, and we'll talk more about this in a couple of bullet points, if you're encountering challenges, if you can't find kosher food and that's something that's part of your Jewish practice, if you need language to explain to your economics professor why you're missing 3 days of school within the first month of the year because it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and you need excused absences for all of these days, they're not supposed to count towards any, again, absence quotas or penalize you in any way, and you don't know how to ask for that. There are people out there, the proverbial grown-ups in the room, who are able to help with these things. So you have to know what resources are out there and available. Again, this could be Hillel, this could be Federation, this could be just other Jewish adults, so to speak, who are out there and ready to take one for the team. If it's awkward for you to have to explain to, again, said proverbial economics professor, why you need to leave, there are people out there who are ready to call that person and to explain and to have those conversations. And we're going to share resources with you that speak to that. Next up, in terms of setting up for success, build community and personal practices. Seek out the Jews, so to speak. When you're thinking about how you're going to hit college campus, if you're still in the deciding phase about where you're going to go, when you're there on a campus tour, ask those questions. Hillels give tours too. You can ask your campus tour guide or whomever else is the resource that's been designated for you, whether it's for a prospective student, an accepted student, a student who's already committed. Seek that community. Is it through Hillel? Is it through Chabad? Is it through an independent organization that's set up? Is there a Jewish studies certificate, major, minor? Is Hebrew offered as one of the potential language credits? All of these are spaces that Jewish community can be built. Are there outside organizations that come to this campus? Does it mean that someone is there who's interning for APAC or Stand With Us or J Street or whatever other organization potentially speaks to whether it's your Jewish feelings or your Israel related feelings? There are resources there to help you build community. And also building of personal practices. Everything that I just listed is external. It's looking for places and spaces to find and meet other Jews. There's also the inner work that happens before you head to campus to say, what exactly am I looking for? Am I seeking, again, a Shabbat practice? Is that something that I want to bring to whomever, Jewish or otherwise, is in my dorm, is in my room, is in my life? Am I going to say, you know what, it's really important to me. My parents have always dragged me to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services, and I don't know if I'm really going to fast, but I'm an adult. I'm making my own choices for the first time. And part of that is choosing Jewish. And maybe it's saying, I want to fast on Yom Kippur. I don't know if I'm going to go to a service the whole time because I don't know anyone and it's awkward. And I've only been here like 2 weeks based on where Yom Kippur is in the calendar, but I'm going to fast because I want to own that. And that's mine. Amazing. Maybe you're saying, you know what, I actually don't really want to fast because that's not a practice that resonates with me, but I want to go somewhere. I want to go somewhere, whether it's on my campus or in this community that I'm trying to make my own. And I want to be in a community of fellow Jews or Jew adjacent individuals. Amazing. Yes, and next up, we have prepare to self-advocate as needed. And that's part of what I alluded to when it came to the question of services and not religious services, but the services that you are given as a person of faith or minority on campus. Maybe that means, again, excuses from classes. Maybe it means there's a food requirement that you have. Maybe it's something else, making sure that you are cared for as your full self, your intersectional self that deeply includes who you are Jewishly. There are resources out there. Not everyone's going to know about them because, as I said a few minutes ago, Jews are less than 2% of the population. Many of you may end up at schools where it doesn't feel like that because we find each other, we congregate, we're kind of loud sometimes, loud and proud, as it were. But a lot of people might not know what you need in order to succeed. So it's up to you to figure out what are those things. Again, what are the practices that matter to you, and to potentially self-advocate as needed, while also knowing, again, the resources to help you because you are never alone in that. Let's move forward a slide. Okay. So next up, we have our next three to know what you're hearing. First of all, what counts as anti-Semitism? Talked about this in the definition of anti-Semitism, but I'm going to say it here. Anything that makes you feel Jewishly uncomfortable because you are a Jew, whether it's by culture, by religion, by faith, by ethnicity, by virtue of your origin, it counts because your feelings are real. If you are in a class, and this is an example of something that happened to me my freshman year, I was in a class because I was a poli-sci major, political science, about global peacekeeping, the history of global peacekeeping. Super interesting. There were 3 different units. One of the 3 was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and every single one of the readings was from a Palestinian perspective. And when I asked, like, I don't understand, when are we going to talk about Israel's side? It was pointed out to me, there are not 2 valid sides here. The same way as when we talked about the situation in Sudan, it's not like we're talking about the pros and cons. We're not discussing, who's right and who's wrong. There was a very clear right and wrong at that moment in terms of, who the world cared for and who was a perpetrator of ethnic cleansing and violence. Obviously, Israel fits into that category. We can't have 2 sides. I hope everyone hears the blatant sarcasm in my voice, but that is legitimately what was said to me, that we can't justify Israel any more than if we were in a history class. We wouldn't be talking about 2 sides of Nazi Germany. We would know the Jews were the victims, the Nazis were the perpetrators. I sat there flabbergasted, trying to figure out, what do I do with this? I need an A in this class because I am an overachiever, and of course I need my good grades to keep up. This is wrong. I know this is wrong. I also don't know how to fight this teacher. I was 19. I was trying to figure out, no one else is saying anything. No one else has any questions. I've spent time in Israel. I have an Israeli dad. I know it's more complex than this, but I don't know what to do. It never occurred to me that this was anti-Semitism. I knew this was anti-Israel. I knew this was wrong. Spoiler alert, this counted as anti-Semitism. And I want to be mindful of the clock, so I'm happy to share offline with anyone who wants to contact me exactly how that situation went down. Everything that we said earlier in terms of what counts. An awkward comment made in a dorm that you don't know if you're supposed to really address or not. Off-color joke, a super off-color joke. It all counts if it's made you feel uncomfortable. And it's up to you, it's up to all of us to then create a culture where you feel comfortable calling it out, whatever that means. If it's, again, something that happened in your dorm and you want to say to the person, hey, I'm Jewish, that was uncool. This, like, the same way that you would hopefully, again, call out if someone were attacking another minority group, whether it's the LGBTQ plus community, whether it's the African-American community, whether it's the Asian American community. Feel comfortable calling it out? Amazing. if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel safe to, again, know those resources and be able to say, this is not okay, and I know who to call to make it better. What about Israel? We talked about the definition of anti-Zionism, those 3Ds, and when it crosses the line into anti-Semitism. But also, again, Israel comes up more than you would think. I don't know what everyone's plans are. If you're thinking, I want to study abroad, and maybe I want to study abroad at Tel Aviv University because I've heard the school is good, but I've also heard the beach is amazing and the food is amazing and it's a really cool place to go. You would be correct on all of the above. This is something that has happened to many. You need a letter of recommendation to study abroad. Your professor won't give it to you to go to Israel because it goes against their politics. They're participating in a boycott of Israel. It counts as anti-Semitism. It counts as trying to keep you from going to Israel, of applying a double standard to Israel. And there are resources available to you to help figure that out. So Israel, anti-Semitism, unfortunately becoming more and more one and the same. If you're ever asked to question whether or not you should be connected to Israel as a Jew, this is something that we're seeing as an increasing problem for Jewish students in different spaces on college campuses, to say that you're totally welcome in the Gay Straight Alliance or this women's group or this feminist project or this environmental eco warriors project, all things that many of us care about. Yes, but you're Jewish. I just need you to confirm that you're not going to bring up Israel here, right? Or like you agree that Israel is a human rights violator, right? If you have to denounce Israel in order to get through the door, that's anti-Semitism. Talked about what happens when it comes from a teacher. Again, this could be any number of different ways. It could be about Israel. It could be about not wanting to sign off on you missing 3 days of school in the month of September. It could be not understanding that on Fridays, again, I don't know everyone's Jewish practices here, but Fridays in the winter, you are not available in the early afternoon because Shabbat has already started. It could be a teacher assigning a project, again, on Friday that is a group project and you can't meet with a group on Saturday and accommodations aren't necessarily being made. All of this, things to be aware of and to understand. Again, not necessarily as anti-Semitism as blatant as I hate you and therefore I don't want you to miss 3 days of class, but could be them saying, it's a lot for a student in September to miss 3 days of class, while still, again, understanding. Then it's up to them to figure out how to help you and accommodate you rather than to put blame on you in that space. We'll advance one more slide. Thank you. So putting everything that we're hearing into context. All right. So we are understanding right now that before you go to campus, you are setting up for success. You are understanding what you're hearing or what may be coming up in the various spaces that you spend time in. Taking it both onto and beyond the campus. First up, social media. We're all on our phones. You're probably on your phone right now. Maybe you're on Instagram, maybe you're on TikTok. Hopefully you're multitasking and listening while you're doing so. Anti-Semitism on social media is absolutely blatant right now. It's terrifying. It's really sad. It's sad that Jewishly, if you want to post a video about making challah or lighting Hanukkah candles or, a TikTok about your Seder, you kind of know that you're going to get hit with Free Palestine. Now, again, your politics may agree with Free Palestine, but to be associated with that solely because you posted Jewish content unrelated to Israel is really hard. It can be really overwhelming. It can make you want to shut down and not be loud and proud Jewishly on your social media. You might see things that people say, people who you follow, people who you view as part of your community. It's real. It's really scary. It's unfortunate because there are so many different spaces online where we connect with other Jews, where people are producing amazing content that we want to see and laugh at and smile and learn from. So to say that as you go to campus, in order to set up for success and to, again, understand what you're hearing, we also need to understand what you're carrying around with you, what your school is putting out there, what your peers and your friends are seeing, and how you protect yourself in those spaces. We have the Jewish resources that we've talked about throughout, the individuals, the organizations, and to know who to reach out to. So to look up before you go to school or before you send your child to school, for the parents and caregivers who are on this call, what is the local ADL network? I went to undergrad in the University of Pittsburgh, as was shared in my bio. The ADL professional who services that part of the country is located in Cleveland, where I ironically also wound up living in later. But I would never have known that. They weren't necessarily a presence on campus, but they were responsible for me. And to be able to say, I know what's out there. To know, again, what are the resources if you want to study abroad in Israel and someone's stopping you from doing so, there's someone out there to help. If you want to study abroad somewhere that's not Israel, if you are really gung-ho to go to London, amazing. See you there, I hope. But to be able to say, how do I live a Jewish life there as well? Whatever that means culturally or religiously, resources out there, and to know what you want to know and to know what you don't know and where to seek out questions and answers. And finally, mental health. The quote that I read from Brad earlier is super real, that in addition to everything else you may be dealing with mental health wise, challenges, obstacles, as well as opportunities and the ways that you access self-care at this really, again, critical moment, going to college, having a major life transition against an ever-changing and fluctuating global backdrop, to then be hit with accusations is horrible. It's traumatizing. It adds anxiety that none of us need and none of us deserve. So also to be really mindful of knowing how to care for yourself in terms of your mental health, having your own self-care practices, and incorporating your Jewish self into that, not letting it be, this is who I am, again, Jewishly, and this is who I am otherwise in my real life, whatever it is that means, but realizing that they can be one and the same, and that your Jewish self needs to be incorporated into whatever your mental health and self-care practices are in order to care for your full self. Last up, we have one more slide on how to prepare for Jewish and Israel on campus, is to focus on Jewish joy. This webinar is super heavy. We're talking about hatred. We're talking about anger. We're talking about things that could be both external and internalized anti-Semitism. That's a lot. College is amazing. Jewish life in college is amazing. This could be the first time, again, going back to that word empowerment, that you are able to access Judaism on your own terms. Maybe, again, you're at a super active campus. There are like 6 different minyanim at Hillel, and you want to try a denomination that's not the one that you grew up with. Or you want to become someone who goes to like the Wednesday morning meditation and yoga people. Amazing. This is a time to be exploring your Jewish joy, understanding what it means for you to access Judaism as an emerging adult, to say, this is what I want to learn more about. This is where I want to stay deeply in my comfort zone, because Judaism is a comfort to me and I want to be in spaces that feel like home. But also, this is a time where I want to get out of my comfort zone in the same way that I'm exploring and trying on different things in every other area of my life. Don't let the threat of anti-Semitism, the reality of anti-Semitism, become the defining factor of your Jewish college journey. There's so much else out there that's fun and amazing. And this doesn't have to be just the heaviness. And I always want to emphasize that. I want to take a breath and to ask for questions, reactions, anything that anyone has either submitted ahead of time, or this is a moment that you would like to submit. We're here for it.
So I got a few questions for you while you were speaking. One of them followed up on something that you said at the very beginning, which was that you weren't here to rank schools. We get that question quite a bit at Tribe Talk, but we did have a follow-up to that, which is, while you're not ranking schools, are there certain categories of schools to be avoided? For example, schools that have strong apartheid weeks or apartheid walls, or schools where student governments have voted in favor of BDS?
So absolutely. And these are things to be super mindful of as you're figuring out what kind of campus you're looking for. There are schools that are known for having really strong anti-Israel presences on them. A couple comments that I want to make. What that means is constantly changing, because while faculty remain for a while, staff remain for a while, student populations turn over every, say, 3 to 5 years, because people are graduating, people are moving on. So what was once a hotbed of anti-Israel activity as soon as the guy who was like really stirring the pot graduates, could change. The same thing. I remember this was when I was in high school. I was very involved with a pro-Israel organization called Right On for Israel. And I remember feeling super empowered when someone asked that question of a professional who was coming to speak to us, like, what's a good school? And his response was, what school did you decide to go to? And they answered, and he said, that's a good school, because you're going to be there and you're going to be that voice, and feeling so empowered that you can affect and change the culture that quickly. That's like the pie in the sky. I will say practically, Hillel does maintain a guide of Jewish life on hundreds of different campuses. You can look up your school, just wherever it is that you're thinking about. Maybe you're just touring, plug it in, Google University of X and BDS, University of X Jewish life, University of X Israel, and you'll be able to see what comes up. Did they have a BDS resolution that was shot down? Did they have one that passed? Do they have a student government that's super active? You can also ask those questions, even if you don't want to call out just the Israel piece, when you're on your tour. Do people care about student government? Here, does student government pass resolutions that are political in any way? I can say when I was an undergrad, nobody cared. Our student government was planning, social events. They weren't necessarily in a place where they were even considering political questions. That has since changed. I want to acknowledge that. So these rankings are out there. You have your resources and your ability to do research, but also to know if you're someone who wants to be involved, your presence is going to be the change on that campus.
Okay, the next question is from a student who said, I walked into class the other day and a fellow student had on a mask from the river to the sea. Do you have any advice on when I should engage?
That's really hard. So for those who might not get the reference, a very popular slogan, chant in certain segments of an anti-Israel and specifically pro-Palestinian community are, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's catchy. First of all, again, to want an independent Palestinian state, I personally do not believe is anti-Semitic. Palestinians, again, there's a huge movement for a two-state solution. To say the Palestinians, again, deserve a homeland, we can have that conversation separately when we talk about our Israel politics. The reason that from the river to the sea specifically has been viewed as an anti-Semitic slogan is because it leaves no room for Israel. The river is the Jordan River, the sea is the Mediterranean Sea. Everything in between that means all of Israel. That's not a conversation about a two-state solution. That's not negotiating. Should we be talking about 48 borders or 67 borders? Like, who gets, Jerusalem? Should Jerusalem be divided or united? What happens to the old city? All of the conversations about a two-state solution that happen in good faith are kind of wiped away when you say from the river to the sea, that's a one-state solution, no Israel. So just giving the context as to why that's anti-Semitic. What do you do? That's up to you. A few different options. Is this someone you're close to? Is this someone who you're a classmate of and would want to engage in the conversation of, do you know what that means? Like, you might be someone who, that person, meaning the person wearing the mask, agrees that there should be a Palestinian state, and you as the Jewish student might also agree. And maybe they don't get it. They don't realize you're not talking about a two-state solution. You're talking about wiping out Israel. Is that what you meant when you put this mask on in the morning? You could open the door to that conversation. Maybe it'd be fruitful. Maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe that's like a lot for you, because if they have a really strong point of view on that subject, you might not feel confident in responding and reacting to it. You also might not want to hear it. Again, maybe this is someone you like. Maybe it's not someone who's your best friend, but someone who's in your social circle, and you don't want to then have to engage on this topic. You can feel free to disassociate. You can feel free to say, I'm just like going to math right now, and I wasn't necessarily ready to step into this conversation. Maybe you have it afterwards, not in the moment with a audience and tempers raised and heated, but to message them after and to say, hey, can we talk about this? and to feel comfortable doing so. And again, to know the resources that are out there for you, to know what is this from the river to the sea thing, and what are some of the arguments against it, so you can come in well prepared to have that conversation.
And that leads us to the last question that I got, which was really a follow-up to what you just said, which is, as a student, do I need to go to college I feel like I need to have a list of answers to criticisms of Israel?
So it's really interesting because the pendulum has shifted so much over the years. When I went to college a number of years ago, that was the thing to do, to go in knowing your facts so that you know exactly what to say. If someone says Israel's an apartheid state, I know how to respond, that Israel has a Arab Muslim Supreme Court justice. So Israel cannot be an apartheid state because Arabs are in the Knesset, in the government, are incorporated into every aspect of society. Bam, I win this argument. Except then they have something else to say of, well, what about there being different roads for Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank? Spoiler alert, that is not actually the case, but we can have that conversation offline. But then I could get a deer in the headlights look. That was off script. I don't know the answer to that one. And then I'm nervous, I'm shutting down. It's really intimidating to not know every single fact and to not know what the other person is going to pull out as their next fun fact of the moment. Then it became, we don't need to know facts. We're here to have an emotional experience. So yeah, you might have more stats than I do, but I could tell you the story of the Israeli soldier that I met on my birthright bus and how they were an amazing human being and put a face to the senselessness of this conflict. Also super legit. But then people came away saying, but I still don't know the facts. Like, I could tell my, charming story about a real life person, but this guy who's saying that Israel's committing genocide, Israel's committing war crimes. For those who are keeping up on the news, something horrible just happened with a Palestinian journalist, and I don't know how to react to that. So I think the answer is both. Be well read, be informed. Don't be a parrot of specific statistics thinking that that's how you're going to, win a battle for hearts and minds, so to speak. To know what's going on, be well informed of the world, have your resources, follow, whether it's, again, on social media and different news feeds, to know what's happening so you can speak to facts, because facts are important. We don't want to be in this world of alternative facts. We want to understand what's happening on the ground and to be able to articulate intelligently on those topics, but also to have a narrative, to be able to say, I'm a human being. This is how I connect. I'm not just here to throw fact for fact at you, but specifically to be in a space where you're confident in at least starting the conversation, being able to know what you don't know, and to say, I want to learn more about that. And that's okay too. You don't need to know every single answer, but you need to be able to engage in the conversation.
Okay, I want to be mindful of time. Last is the last question. Are there specific sites that we should be following?
Oh, interesting. So I don't know that I'll necessarily endorse specific sites. I can say that the Times of Israel for reporting and just like really up to the minute information about Israel is a great space to spend time in. I also am sending the name of someone on Instagram, a few different people on Instagram, actually, who are just great to follow for ongoing content about Israel. I will say, again, everyone has a bias. These are not unbiased people. These are loud and proud Zionists who are, again, amazing individuals who are putting out really provocative, great content. It may not be your cup of tea. That is okay. But these are, again, just a few people, and I will just add the word that I said earlier, Times of Israel, that can be followed as a news site and resource as well.
Okay, and I would be remiss if I didn't say also, please follow Tribe Talk at TribeTalk_org on Instagram. Samantha, this has been so amazing. I know I personally, every time I listen to you, I learn so much, and I really appreciate it. And I know that the students that are watching this have really learned a tremendous amount too. We cannot thank you enough. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who was out there listening tonight and who contributed questions. We really appreciate it. And we wish everybody a good night.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you all to Tribe Talk and those who have been here.